Is recording now. I want to thank everybody for joining this evening. I'm David Lee Preston. I'm a longtime member of Sons and Daughters of Holocaust Survivors of Greater Philadelphia. And I want to thank you all for joining us. This is now week 35 for the innocent members of our extended family being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. Our organization stands firmly with Israel in its effort to obliterate that terrorist group. We seek the safety and speedy return of those hostages, and we pray for the safety of the Israeli forces responding to the terror of October 7th. Am Yisrael Chai.
Amen.
Welcome to our June 2024 book program, our 6th monthly book program of the year, and the 14th in a series that began last year. Our group was founded in 1979, which makes us one of the first organizations of its kind. We have no dues or officers, but we do have a passion for truth and a bond formed by shared experience. We are an active, vibrant, and welcoming organization. If you are a child of survivors and you live in the Philadelphia area and you're interested in joining, please drop us a note or leave a note in the chat, and one of us will respond. These free monthly Zoom programs are at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Sundays, and they are recorded and can be found within a day or two on my YouTube channel, which is shown in the chat area. This program will be available there tomorrow. I hope that everyone now will make a note of next month's program at 7 p.m. Sunday, July 17th. Joining us from his home in Brooklyn, author Menachem Kaiser, who grew up in Toronto, a 3G, that is a grandson of a survivor. He will discuss his critically acclaimed 2021 book, Plunder, a memoir of family property and Nazi treasure, for which he received the 2022 Sami Rohr Prize for Jewish Literature, administered by the National Library of Israel. It's the story of his quest to reclaim his family's apartment building in Sosnowiec, Poland, and of his astonishing entanglement with treasure hunters. You won't want to miss it. That's 7 p.m. Sunday, July 14th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time for those in Malta. 7 p.m. Sunday, July 14th, Menachem Kaiser, Plunder, a memoir of family property and Nazi treasure. The Zoom link will be the same as the one you are using right now. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting a discussion of our member Peter Wiesner's fascinating and unusual memoir, Bipolar Refugee, a saga of survival and resilience, published last year by Amsterdam Publishers and widely available on Amazon and many other sources. Peter's mother, who died in 1991, the daughter of a pious cantor in Germany, was 16 years old in 1939 when she was sent on a kinder transport from Berlin to England, a journey that saved her life. Peter was born in South Croydon, England in 1945, spent his childhood in both East and West Berlin, where his mother returned after the war, and they emigrated to Santa Monica, California in 1954. Peter has a degree in history from the University of California at Berkeley, a master's in communication from Penn, and a doctorate in education from Rutgers. He worked for several educational institutions from 1974 to 1984, and then spent 5 years at Rutgers as a television producer. From 1989 to 2013, he held a number of roles at IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the world's largest technical professional association dedicated to advancing technology for the benefit of humanity, and an organization to which my father belonged as an electrical engineer with DuPont. Peter has produced TV documentaries on social, technological, and environmental issues pertaining to green engineering and sustainability on a global scale. After retirement, he wrote a novel titled Extremis, published in 2015, a dystopian sci-fi satire about the demise of high tech. Since 1980, he and his wife, Linda, have lived outside Philadelphia in Newtown, Bucks County. They have 2 married sons and 5 grandchildren. His book, Bipolar Refugee, is based on his mother's 60-page typed manuscript about her life. Peter will be happy to take your questions at the end of his presentation. You can put questions in the chat area at any time, or simply raise your hand to vocalize a question after Peter's talk. I'm delighted to turn the hosting of this program over to Peter Wiesner. Okay, Peter's the host now.
Okay, let me just start talking a little bit before I go into the PowerPoint presentation. I've already had a very nice introduction here, so I don't have to go there. I just want to talk about what impelled me to write the memoir. And in some, it's a story over a period of time. When I was growing up, I learned in dribs and drabs what happened to my mother, about the death of her parents while I was still in Berlin. But I didn't know the circumstances until we came to the United States. And then only when she had a breakdown due to bipolar disorder that I pretty much got the full story. That is, my sister and me. And our relatives didn't talk much about it, although they were also refugees who came shortly before the war. One from Shanghai, another from Africa. I mean, it's a typical story in terms of the diaspora due to the Holocaust. My mother talked about it after she knew we knew, and she shared some stories about her mother. And we got, I got to know the grandparents I never met, and that's of course a very sad thing for most of us who lost family and in the Holocaust. She was very upset about having lost her parents, and she wrote about it. She wrote an autobiography. She kept all kinds of memorabilia, whatever she could. And when she died in 1991, I gained possession of all of those things that she'd collected over a lifetime, her swimming certificates, school reports, all of those things she managed somehow to save. And some of the things that she had were saved by relatives who survived in Berlin during the war. among the things that I inherited was this kippah, my grandfather's kippah with his initials in it. I don't know if you can see it, but that was a real precious possession. The other objects that I have are, and I'm not so sure about how they were preserved or whether in fact they belonged to my uh, uh, grandfather, but I was sort of led to believe that they did belong to him. That is a case with a talus and a yarmulke, and I've kept all of these things in a very safe and precious spot. So I'm with you, all of you who have, latched onto those few possessions that survive because they sort of embody memory. And that's pretty much that got me going on maybe taking her manuscript and turning it into something that might be readable. I mean, she did a good job in writing about herself, but it was 80 pages and it needed a lot of editing and a lot of annotation and background research to turn it into a viable story. So I set about doing that about 10 years ago. And I wrote something up and I sent it to an agent in New York, and she said, "Well, it's a very interesting story, but it doesn't quite grab me yet." And and she explained why. And I actually took that to heart. I didn't take that as I mean, she was very supportive and she obviously read it. So I kind of ruminated for a while and I got going on another project, a writing project, which was the sci-fi novel, which kind of uh, showed me what I have to do to write to reach a more popular audience, because my writing had been up to that point very academic. And when you write for an audience, you have to think about story arc, you have to think about transitions from one area to the next. Uh, in other words, you have to learn the craft. And I set out to do that. So when I was done with that, I got that sci-fi novel published, a small publisher in Oakland, California, but nonetheless a real publisher. And I set about doing this job for, at least tell a story and make it publishable, because everyone I knew and who knew her story said it was worthwhile sharing with other people. So it became my number one project for the past so many years after retirement. And then it was just a matter of iterations. I wrote manuscript. My wife criticized them. I sent them off to friends. But with all the writing you do, there's even more rewriting. And in order to tell a story that uh, is compelling, that works. And I don't have a natural gift for it. I had to work awfully hard at it. And then set out to find a publisher. I contacted agents, and they weren't interested in a Holocaust memoir. It just doesn't make money. That's sort of the message I got. I contacted about 20 agents and also a number of publishers. But then a friend of mine contacted me and said, "Well, Peter, there's a publisher in Holland who publishes Holocaust memoirs. She's pretty good. She's an academic. She's got an art history PhD and expert on Van Gogh and so on." I said, "Well, this may be a good match." So I just sent it off. The first publisher I mailed the actual manuscript to, and she said, "Okay, let's go with it." She wasn't sure whether or not it was a real Holocaust story because my mother left in 39. And the memoir also focuses on her life after the war, her struggle with bipolar disorder, as well as the trauma from, losing her parents. And as far as I was concerned, and I think she was also, the two are intermingled. I mean, her trauma, her bipolar disorder was pretty well treated if with rest and tea and sympathy is what she would call it. When she had her first uh, uh, um, breakdown in England, she was in nurses training school, and they just treated her well, and she recovered very, very quickly. Same thing in Berlin, but in the United States, it turned out to be a problem because there was I mean, the stigma associated with these problems, and she was treated with shock treatments and all kinds of misdiagnosed and so on. So it was hell for our entire family for about 5 years until things kind of calmed down and she learned to cope with it, and we did fine. So, I mean, that's kind of the long and short of it. And what I can do is go through the presentation, show a lot of pictures, which I think is always good, and uh, and then answer questions at the end. I mean, if somebody feels compelled that I ought to explain something, I don't mind. I can be interrupted. I think this is an informal kind of presentation, or we'll wait until the end. So I think I'm ready to share the screen, which I'll do. And I hope I don't screw this up. I had David gave me a little lesson on how to use Zoom, and I hope I get it all right. So here I go. Share screen. Boom. And now I have to, oh, slideshow. Um, let's see. Oh, here we are. I play from start. Okay, can everybody see it? Can I hear you? I can't hear you.
Yes.
It's very, very good.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna start here. Thanks for inviting me, and this is a very big deal for me to be talking to you. Here we go. Here she is, my mother. This was picture was taken around 1951, and she had that photo, and I used it for the cover of the book. She was born in 1922, died in 1991. She was 69 when she died. Now, whenever I talk about my mother, I like to keep in mind that there's a context, and for me, that is, the broader refugee issue, because that's really the major part of her story. So I just remind people that there were 60 million refugees during the war, and they're a huge number today. And a lot of organizations are there to help them, including HIAS, is a refugee organization that helped our family and is now currently helping all kinds of people throughout the world. And there she is. The picture was taken in 1939. And the major part of the story is that she left Berlin on the Kindertransport in 1939, May 4th to be exact. And she was 16. And it was at first she was really anxious to go, but once she was on the train, the reality sank in as to what really the situation was. But let's go back into the very, very beginning. She was born in Friedland, Mecklenburg, which is in North Germany, about 100 miles north of Berlin, not too far from the Baltic. It's a very rural area. And here she is I think as a toddler, a 2-year-old, and on the left is a shot of Friedland from that period. And she talked about hearing animals, and she loved it. And she lived there until she was about 5.5 years old. Her father, Stefan Koroshinsky, was trained as a cantor in the Pale of Poland. Now, he and his brother left Poland when he was about 15 or 16, and his brother was a bit younger, and they came to the United States and lived in Macon, Georgia, to join his half-brother and half-sisters who had left for America sometime before them. And he trained as a cantor in Poland, but in the United States, I don't know whether he continued that. Then he went back to England, lived there for 9 years, and came to Germany in 1919. And he had been a British subject, but then he came to Germany because his mother had moved from Poland to Strasbourg, which was very close to Friedland, Mecklenburg, where my mother was born. And By that time, he was certainly a cantor in the area. He might have been one in England. I don't know, but by profession, he was a tailor, and if and that was what his training is, and he did that in England and possibly in the United States. And that's um, my grandmother, or my mother's mother, Gertrude Silverstein. She came from a completely different background. Her family was pretty much German Jewish. Um, they came from the family originated, or at least before coming to Berlin, in Schönlanke, which is a western part of Poland now, which was formerly part of Germany. So they were German speaking right from day one. But she was born in Berlin, and this is her larger family. You can see it was a middle class family uh, with all the trappings of middle class life. Many of them were in the apparels industry. Some of them were very successful, and she had a fairly comfortable life until the Depression. Now, I should mention that I'm a little bit ahead of myself now. Let me go back. She and my grandfather met through an arrangement through her brother and a friend of uh, my grandfather, and so she agreed to keep a kosher house and also dietary laws, and I think they were already kosher. I think this family was kosher, but I don't know whether that's the case. But she came from a liberal background, and he came from a more religious oriented family. Now, they left uh, Friedland and then lived in Strasbourg as where some of his family lived. And the reason for that was because he had lost his business and he had to give up his house, and the plan was for them to move to Berlin to join family there who were able to help them to become reestablished. Now, this is just a picture of Weimar, Berlin at that time, and here's a generic picture of the school. Now, my mother went to a public school when she got there, and it went reasonably well for a while. She got along with kids, she had friends and so on, but not until 1933 when the Nazis gained power, and then her best friend turned against her, at least said, I can't play with you. And she said, why? Well, because you're a Jew, and but you're not like all the others. So she still, her friend tried to soften it, but she knew that things were quite different then, and when she was promoted to go to a gymnasium and recommended, and she went to a gymnasium for a few months, the principal gave her a letter to give to her father saying that, and the letter stated that she was no longer allowed to continue school because of her father being a Polish Jew. At that time, I don't know whether the Polish part was instrumental in having her leave in 1933, but at any rate, she had to. And what she did was to go to a Jewish school, the Jüdische Kinderschule, which is located near the Neue Synagogue, and she bicycled there and became a student. She loved the school. I mean, it was like an oasis. School plays. She studied music under a teacher who was really qualified, with whom she eventually formed a lifelong friendship. He also came to England and became in charge of music education in the London area, and also became, believe it or not, an expert on Wagner. But she remembered him fondly and a number of other teachers who took her under their wings. So here she is under the Red Arrow. She's in a school play about Rabbi Akiva, and this took place around 1936. I came across this photo when my wife and I went to Berlin for and attended an exhibit at the Neue Synagogue about Jewish life during the 1930s. And my wife said, Peter, you know what? I have a feeling I'm going to see a picture of your mother. And we went inside and we looked at the exhibit and went through a machine that had a lot of photos in it that flipped through. And sure enough, she recognized my mother in one of the photos and called me over and said, hey, I think this is her. And I said, well, it sure looks like her. And I sent a copy of her picture, of this picture, to a friend of hers who went to school with her, who had escaped from Berlin to Belgium. And she said, yeah, that's her indeed. So that was a coincidence. And she was, a very spirited girl and woman. She, rebellious. She wanted to strike out on her own, and you can sort of see her here. Here she is with a friend, and this is Jenny, who went to school with her. I don't know who this girl is, and here she's playing a recorder with her best friend Dorothea Schindler, who was a little bit older than her, and I think she got to know her after she left the school. And the sad story is that uh, Dorothea and her husband were sent to Auschwitz after they had served as slave laborers in Berlin, and that's a long story. She died there. She met her husband in Berlin after the war and asked him how he survived. And he said he was an electrician. He was a forced laborer in charge of constructing the crematoria. And he said that to her that was probably a blessing because the conditions in Auschwitz so horrendous, and his wife died on account of being sick and completely and utterly depressed. So very sad story. My mother thought he had been a capo, but he wasn't. I looked. I found out more about what he did, and there were others, other electrician whom he knew, who also worked in Berlin with him and for Siemens Corporation, and they were also involved in, with the Sonderkommando, and then there was some underground that they were part of, but I don't know. He was liberated when the Russians came through. That is her husband. Of course, since 1933, 40, 34, 35, things just got progressively worse for Jews. And it says Jews are not welcome guests. I'm sure you've seen these pictures, burning of synagogues. All of the synagogues in Mecklenburg were burned, and we don't have any record of my grandfather serving as a cantor. When I went to the Neue Synagogue to the research department, and they said, well, a lot of records were just burned. Maybe something will crop up, but they didn't come across anything. They tried to help me. So I just have these mementos and photos of my mother's stories to support, and also her family to support that he was a cantor in Mecklenburg and also in Berlin. Now, the migration in 1937 to 40 of my relatives, they went all over the world, as you can see from these lines, to Africa, Israel, South America, Peru, Shanghai, and of course the United States. I think that's not too unusual, but that's what happened. And I met the ones who came to the United States, but not the others. Now, when 1939, by that time, her family was desperate to get her out of Berlin because they weren't able to get a visa for the entire family to immigrate to the United States because of the restrictions on granting visas to Jews, particularly Polish Jews with a name like Kodoshinsky, which was her maiden name. So her father had contacts in England, a Jewish family that he knew through his contacts in when he lived in London, and they agreed to be her foster family, and also he got her onto the Kindertransport. She was just barely young enough to be that because the limit of children on the Kindertransport was 17. So she just made it by the skin of her teeth. Now, I should mention that when that those responsible for the Kindertransport, among them was the Jewish Refugee Committee in England, and which later on became World Jewish Relief. Of course, there was the Jewish community in Berlin that facilitated matters as far as getting visas and finding families who, publicizing the program and organizing the whole effort. The whole Kindertransport program took place over a year or so, and they managed to enable about 10,000 Jewish children from various cities throughout Europe to come to England and other places like in Europe and the United States, but mostly England. This is, among the places that were destroyed during Kristallnacht was the Jewish Community Center, and of course on the right is the building that was reconstructed. Now you can see the similarities of some aspects here that echo the building that once stood there. And I visited the Jewish Community Center when my wife and I went back to Berlin in 1923 to lay Stolpersteine for my mother's family. When she left on the Kindertransport, this is sort of the kind of suitcase. She didn't really have the suitcase here, but I use it as a metaphor. But this is the suitcase that I received from her that contained many of her papers. So it's become kind of a metaphor of her desire to have a story told. The teddy bear, this is also not the actual teddy bear, but a facsimile. But these writings here was a pamphlet that her parents prepared for her to encourage her to just be religious and also to be strong. Here she arrived in Liverpool Station, London, England, and she lived with a family. The name of the family was Cohen in North London. For her, the whole trip was quite traumatic. Many of the children on the train she took care of them, whom she took care of, were crying, and she comforted them. And when she got there, she felt just completely empty. She didn't want anybody to really claim her. She realized that the dangers that her parents faced by having to stay behind because she was old enough. She knew precisely what was going on in Germany and what was going to happen. And also her parents knew early on what the situation was, and they did all they could to get out. They, they weren't a wealthy family, so they certainly didn't stay behind to hold on to any belongings, but they didn't get out, and a number of their other elderly family members also didn't survive. Let's see. Well, my mother survived the London Blitz, and the Foster family, the Cohen family, they moved. They were relocated eventually to a rural area in Wiltshire, England, and The one thing I should mention about my mother, you know, her experience with the foster family is that she recognized they sacrificed a lot to take her in. She shared a bed with one of their daughters who was about the same age, and the agreement was that when she got there, that she would work in the family store. And while she really wanted to continue her schooling, but she accepted that even though she was not happy about having her education be interrupted, as it was in Berlin after she graduated from the girls' school in 1937. So not having an education was a big blow to her, and she was determined really to do something about it when she turned of age. Now, here's what she looked like. She was an enemy alien. That's what they called them at the time. But she didn't have any problems, with the authorities. She just had a report, and she doesn't have any. She's very grateful that she was able to go to England despite her disappointments. But then again, everyone had to deal with the war, and she was simply one of them. Now, when she was in Wiltshire, in Marlborough, which is a town in Wiltshire, she met another Mr. Cohen who introduced her to the Savernake Cottage Hospital, uh, which was not too far from where she lived, and they were willing to take her in as a nursing student. Now, she had wanted to become a nurse long before then, and then she exchanged letters with her parents describing what she wanted to do, and they were generally pretty supportive, although they worried that because of her temperament, that might be too much for her. But there she was in nurses training school. Here's a group of students from that school, and on the right, you actually see her. I think this is her here on her 21st birthday with a group of young women who were training to be nurses. While she was in nurses training school, she desperately wanted to find out what happened to her parents and to her family. And although from 38 to 39, through up to 40, she was able to exchange letters uh, 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 indirectly through relatives in the United States. So her mother would send a letter to her cousins, and they would redirect the letter to her in England. And she also responded that way. Now, that wasn't possible once war was declared by the United States in 41. So the only means of communication between her and her parents and relatives were through these Red Cross letters. And here, this is kind of what they looked like. And this is, uh, it's she kept on pressing them. What happened to my mother? Is there any news? And and they were trying not to break her the bad news, but then finally she was told that she had been deported to Riga, and that there was no word from her since then. Let me see, I kind of missed the slides here. Okay, I went too far. Yeah, here we are. So she became very depressed while she was in the hospital, and this was perhaps her first bout with bipolar disorder, although there was no diagnosis for it. But the nursing staff, including one German woman who worked there, were very kind to her and helped her through this. And also, one of her good friends was the daughter of a German mother. So none of them were Jewish, but they reached out to her and they knew what she was facing. So that sort of begins the sort of complex story of my mother. What makes the story unusual, I will soon explain. Uh, but here on the picture on the right is the forest, the Savernake forest, which was right around the corner from the hospital. And she would go there for walks just when she had time off to kind of settle herself. And she wondered, what happened to her mother while she was having all these nice walks in the forest. Um, but later on, when she finished the first phase of her training, she was transferred to a large hospital in Oxford, England, called the Radcliffe Infirmary. And this is the picture on the right, and you can see some Oxford traffic there on the left. It was a, much larger, more impersonal kind of hospital compared to Savanac. And but while she was going there, she was exposed to university life at Oxford University, and she was a very outgoing, socially skilled person. She already knew English by the time she arrived in England because her father had spoken English and she studied English in school and she had a gift for languages. So by this time she was speaking, British English, and she, was exposed to a world that she aspired to, but really was out of her reach. She met my father, who see a picture there, who was a student of literature and theater, and they fell in love, and I was the result, as you can see there. She's sitting there with me, and this was in 1945, and this is 1946. And but of course, the problem was that he wasn't around that much. He was busy developing his career, and she felt very isolated. He offered to marry her, and she didn't want to marry him because she didn't think he was committed to family life. So eventually, she just said, they fought a lot, and she just decided to leave him. And with help from the Jewish Refugee Committee, she got a job as a domestic so she could take care of me. Hit the wrong button again, excuse me. And eventually, he still visited her there, and he still tried to, my father did, he tried to convince her to marry him, but his family wasn't that excited about the idea. And so she kind of felt out in the cold. But again, she wanted the whole thing. She didn't just want to marry for convenience. That's just the kind of person she was. She thought she could do it on her own if she had to. Well, that's when the story gets a little different here. In Oxford, a number of German prisoners were stationed, including Heinz Wiesner, who turned out to be my sister's father. And he met her, and they were talking German. He came from Berlin, and they had a lot of things in common in terms of where they lived in Berlin. And he fell in love with her, and he wanted to marry her and take care of me, and that he said his family would welcome them, and so on. And so here she was in basically a servant with no future in England, and even though she was grateful to the English and actually loved England in many, many ways, she always spoke highly of England and always wanted to cook me a full English breakfast and so on. But it just didn't work out for her. But for a lot of people who went over there, it did work out. So it didn't in this case. So she decided to go back to Germany. She knew already that two of her aunts, her aunt and her mother, had survived, and she also wanted to find out what happened to her parents because she never got the full story. So she said, "Well, I'm going to leave England and go back and see what I can find out." And she married Heinz Wiesner, my sister's father, my stepfather, and here's just a picture of the rest of the family. And she was a member of the family, but it didn't really work out. And the reason for that isn't because of being Jewish or anything like that, but class differences. My mother came from a middle-class background, and she thought she could, live, the working class life and all that. But and she had sort of communist sympathies and left-wing sympathies, and she had certain ideas of who she was. And it turned out that uh, she was her parents' daughter, and her expectations were formed by her upbringing, and she realized that. And but she was also a very spirited person who wanted to be on her own and wanted to forge ahead. Now, here's a picture of me and my sister. I was age, it's I guess about 5 and 2, and uh, now growing up in Berlin, when we were kids, I mentioned before that I became aware of my mother having lost her parents fairly early, and that was during a visit to Weißensee cemetery. It's a huge cemetery in Berlin where my grandfather and my mother's uh, grandparents were buried. She took us there and she started to cry, and I sort of, she just couldn't help herself, and she most of the time she just tried to shield us from that, but from her sorrows. But in this case, she just wasn't able to, and she also was depressed, so she got some help. By that time, she'd also left her husband, and with the idea of getting a divorce, and uh, and she sought help and got it through the Jewish community at the Jewish hospital, not too far from the cemetery, in fact. And my sister and I went to a Jewish children's home, also in East Germany, which is now a hospice for children. Was during the war was also a deportation point for Jews. So it has quite a history that I found out when I went back to visit. It's completely changed now. But I had pleasant memories of being there. They were training us uh, for a possible life in Israel, making sure that we were tough, that we learned a little bit about agriculture, learned Jewish songs, and so on. So my real first exposure to Jewish culture was here. Um, my mother recovered, and she was by that time active in the Jewish community. She was in a choir, Jewish choir, and she was a nurse for a summer camp that the Jewish community ran. So she was sort of part of that now, and we took a lot of trips to Charlottenburg, which is a heavily Jewish area in Berlin, where also her family had lived at one time. And she went to the Jewish community center, which was headquartered on Meinecke Straße. That was the temporary headquarter. And there's also headquarter, but it was associated with the Jewish community. You can see a kind of a plaque that indicates its history. So I remember going there. It didn't quite look like this, but I remember it being quite nice. And my mother, though, when she was on her own after we were reunited with her, uh, she she wasn't quite sure what to do because she couldn't take a job because she didn't have the papers, and the Jewish community helped her find a place for the two of us so that she could get a job uh, in nursing. And by that time, um, we had plans to go to America, and her single goal was to get the visa straightened out and get the funding necessary for us to leave. And that took about a year or two. And we spent time in another children's home, in this case, run by the Lutherans. And that was not a traumatic experience for me, really, because I got to play with other kids and I adapted pretty well, and so did my sister. But my mother visited us all the time as much as she could, and she also got a place nearby. So we never really felt that much apart from her. So in 1954, we took the plunge and took one of Onassis' ships, the Olympia, from Bremerhaven to Newark, and and then a train across the country to go to America. It was a very exciting trip for us, but she was a bit depressed. She didn't know what lay ahead for her. She kind of felt like a refugee again and didn't know, what to do really. So when we got there, we settled down. We lived in my cousin's motel for a little while before we could get settled. These are pictures of Santa Monica. This is the main drag in Santa Monica. This is a picture of the motel, which wasn't too far from Santa Monica Pier. And it was really, like a whole new world for my sister and me. We really enjoyed all the trappings of American life and learned English, like, very, very quickly, adapted to school okay. But my mother was depressed. And a year later, she just had a major breakdown. And that's really when I learned about what had happened. That she was ranting about her parents. And it was a traumatic experience for my sister and me, because it just changed everything in terms of how we looked at things. Because from that point on, we were aware of our mother's trauma and her continued struggle with bipolar disorder. So there was a Holocaust legacy that we didn't really know about at the time, but that existed in dribs and drabs as we found out more and more what happened to her family. These are some of the places where her relatives were sent. And this is the gravestone of her father, and she added her mother's name to it because there was no grave for her, indicating that she was shot in Riga, Latvia, in 1941. She was very bitter about her mother not getting a decent funeral. Well, meanwhile, while all that was going on, we still had our family life. This was taken at an amusement park. I went to Hebrew school for a while at Beth Shalom in Santa Monica. After, we were in a couple of foster homes though, because when my mother had bipolar disorder, she had to be hospitalized. So that was very unsettling, but not traumatic for us, because my sister and I were always together. We were very close. And our mother always kept in touch with us and saw us as frequently as she could. So when people say, oh, it's so awful, you were in and out of foster homes, well, not really. It wasn't that awful, because we had this emotional tie to her, and she was a very warm person. So I've been a lot more fortunate than a lot of people who have trouble with their parents or with their mother. I mean, we counted on our mother's love, and she, I think, counted on ours. Well, I mean, things got gradually better for us. In 1960, she became a US citizen. You can see a picture of her, and she was really proud of that. And in between, I mean, 30 or 40 years, I mean, it would take a long time to go over all aspects, my going to high school, our experience with school, and so on. But suffice it to say, we survived, and we had a lot of happy times and interspersed with some, difficult times when she had her breakdowns. But the lucky thing is we had our relatives nearby who helped, And also the Jewish community again stepped in. So when we went to foster homes, they were Jewish foster homes. Now I recognized my mother's history and story, and when she asked me to have an Orthodox bar mitzvah, I said, sure, why not? I wasn't particularly observant. I just thought I owed it to her, and so I had an Orthodox bar mitzvah, and that was that. And so I think it's very important to honor your parents as best as you can. She tried to do that with hers, even though she differed in terms of what they expected from her, and she felt terribly guilty about that. But she was who she was, and I think she was true to her, true to herself. She was an honest person. She was told it like it is. She was very well liberal in her outlook in terms of racial issues and social class and so on. Uh, and she was a wonderful person, and bipolar disorder couldn't take that away from her. Now, on the right, you sort of see her shrine, as I call it, and her cat. And these were the things that were important to her. You can see a picture of her father. There was a candlestick that also my sister inherited that were, I think, preserved against from relatives who survived in Berlin during the war. And, a lot of family pictures. And, she knew she had, there are pictures of her grandchildren. She was a great grandmother, very warm. They loved her. And so it's a very sad story. In some ways, had a happy ending. I mean, I think her life ended at 69, which was much too soon. She had congestive heart failure, brought on perhaps by the medication she took, perhaps by emphysema. I don't know. I don't want to second guess the doctors, but I think she had a full life, and she managed to stay out of institutions. So when she died, she was, she was independent, and she really wanted that. And she died with her boots on. She was a strong person in many, many ways, and a very warm person who happened to suffer from bipolar disorder. And any of you who are familiar with that will surely understand. Now, here's the family that she left behind, all kinds of people here. And we all managed pretty well, and everyone you see here was loved her and was proud of her, despite the fact that she had the bipolar issues. And so, the story doesn't end with her death. After she died, I wrote the memoir, and my wife and I went to Germany several times. Previously, I'd gone there on business and also for conference, but the last three trips were pretty much focused to figure out what was going on there. And two of them specifically connected with writing the memoir. I visited all the places she's been to in England, in Belgium, not in Belgium, but I visited one of her friends in Belgium, and also in Berlin, as well as Latvia and Poland. In Berlin, there are a number of places to visit. Among them is, of course, the Wannsee conference, where Hitler made the decision to essentially murder the Jews, and it was directly related to the decision to kill the 1,000 Jews who went to Riga, Latvia, who left Berlin about in late 1940, and who were 41 rather, who were killed there. And it's still hard for me to talk about these things, but you have to. We went to Auschwitz. We knew that this is where her good friend Dorothea Schindler died. And it's a very sad place. I mean, you have people leaving stones, but it's I found it very sad and in some respects wasn't too thrilled by it. Um, Now, also the trips to Berlin, I mentioned the Wannsee Conference. This is where they made the decision to kill the Jews, and here's another place where my grandmother lived um, before she was deported. She took the care of the children of Rabbi Martin Salomansky, who was a rabbi in Berlin, with the liberal branch of Judaism. And I assume that was through a connection of her father that her mother went there to take care of his children. I don't know the full story, but it's sad that the rabbi also was eventually deported and his two children were killed. So all of that behind us, well, you do the best you can to commemorate, and we did. We went to Germany and finally in 1923 to commemorate my mother and her family uh, at the last place where they lived, in a place called Friedenschein, with students from the Max Planck Gymnasium. And this took about 3 years to do because of COVID. So I was in touch with the school for about 2 or 3 years and participated in educational projects with them. They're dedicated to ending racism. So that was the reason why I decided to be involved with them in doing the Stolperstein ceremony and planning events before and after it. So um, reconciliation, I think, is important, as well as commemoration. Well, that ends the presentation. Here's the book, and there's the publisher's name, and I guess I'm going to stop sharing and answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I guess I'll ask the first question because it's a question that you predicted would ultimately be asked by someone, so I'll ask it. Why would your mother go back to Germany to marry a German prisoner of war?
Well, they came from same neighborhood. He was 15 when he was conscripted. He they came from a working class family. They were communists. Um, she felt not accepted in England. She loved my father, and we kept in touch with him all, for the rest of our life. And he tried to convince her to stay. My father did. Um, his mother wasn't too thrilled about it, and my mother realized that. So she was one. I'm not going to be anywhere where I'm not fully wanted. She was like all or nothing kind of person, and she was a domestic for a year or so, and she took care of family and kids and so on, and she felt, like very isolated. She couldn't continue her nursing career at that point. And so she said, well, here's somebody who really wants me. He's attractive. He's nice. His family wants me. She had been engaged to a Jewish man while she was in nurses training school, but for some reason that didn't work out. I don't know the story at all. But despite the fact that she had contact with the Jewish community all throughout, including in London, and they actually helped her to return to Berlin and to be reconnected with the Jewish community there. So it's complicated. And um, I can understand it more easily than I can to explain it, because it's a question I have asked. But I can explain it away by saying, well, she had bipolar disorder, but that really wouldn't do it. I mean, she was very, very spirited and not always rational at that point in terms of the kind of life decisions that she makes. And she really wanted to go back because she felt terrible about losing her parents. And she just wanted to find out what the heck happened to her life. And going back, and that was her way to go back. But she also thought she'd have a shot at having a real family. And she took a flyer. I mean, the only reason it didn't work out is because he had an alcohol problem. Otherwise, it wasn't a lack of commitment.
Well, I meant to ask you about that as well, and then I'll turn it over to some of the other questions. But can you speak a little bit about how the alcoholism impacted your family?
Well, I mean, I just grew to hate it. I hate any alcoholism and all that. So when ever see the smell of a bar, I just want to run. I mean, that's kind of what I walked away from. And I mean, we would drink alcohol like a glass of wine, you know, Shabbos, or just say the bracha for wine and so forth. But I'm not one for alcoholism. It's a terrible thing because it turns people, they become hostile and not a good thing. Um, so I mean, does that answer your question?
No, no, I'm curious because you delve into this a little bit about the extent to which the alcoholism impacted your whole family um, situation and
Well, he turned out to be a bit violent when got drunk. He was and abusive, and she just wouldn't have it. And he wasn't pulling his weight. His mother tried to straighten him out, and uh, I was close to his sister who taught me German. It was a complicated situation, but she just left him and didn't want to be found, and that's what she did.
all right.
Like with my father, that's just the way she is. She doesn't, she's not going to be subjected to either neglect or abuse.
Well, she comes across in your writing and in your presentation tonight as a very strong-willed person, and several people have already commented in the chat about what a wonderful job you've done to pay tribute to her, and we are very pleased and proud to have been able to enable you to tell the story tonight. And I'd like to ask if anybody has any questions beyond that. Isabel asked, have you and your family participated in the Kinder Transport Association?
Oh, sure. I'm on the education committee of the Kinder Transport Association. So I'm actually going to be representing them at the Jewish Federation event at Bucks County Community College. There's a fair there on the 9th of June. So yeah, I'm active and also with the Holocaust Awareness Museum. I mean, what I'm trying to do is extend the reach of the Kinder Transport Association to the Philadelphia area. And Melissa Hager, the executive director, is going to organize an event in the area for Kinder. So and I'm, also interested in just giving talks generally about the Holocaust, although I wouldn't be talking about my mother chapter and verse to kids. I would handle that quite differently. Uh, but I have to admit, I have to really emphasize what it was like to be with her and to be raised by her. She didn't raise our voice. She didn't have to raise her voices with us. she didn't, she was, we were a very harmonious family. So we would have a year of utter peace and just go on with our lives and have a good time. And then she'd have a breakdown. It was just kind of crazy. And we got used to that. And then after a while, they used lithium to calm down her bipolar. And she had then long periods of, reasonable way of life. I mean, she was a nice person and she reached out to people. And she was very cheerful and positive. So when I'm just as interested in educating people about the mental illness and the stigma associated with, as I am about the trauma caused by the Holocaust. And as I indicated before, the two I think, are related. Although, how would I know? But I mean, I assume it is. And there are a number of people who talk about intergenerational impact of, the Holocaust, from the survivors to the second and third generation. I guess there's some research to support that. I haven't delved into it that much to have a point of view, but I suspect there is some link. I don't know if it's genetic, but it certainly is as soon as you become aware of what has happened to your family, that's bound to have an impact on you. So here you go. And I'm not particularly traumatized, although I must say that growing up, I've tended to be cautious and sometimes I just shut myself off in order to cope. I'm very task oriented and I set goals and that's how I function. And she was kind of like that too. She wanted to do something, she did it. That's kind of what I learned from her.
Uh, if anyone wants to vocalize a question, feel free. Yes, Jeanette, you have to unmute.
I am. Okay. Hi, Peter. I don't know if you remember, we were in person at Hammock, and I had mentioned to you how my father was from Berlin. His first name
Yes.
is Heinz also. So I thought that was kind of interesting. They didn't live too far from each other, but your mother was actually a little bit older than my parents. So, but what I wanted to ask you, which I was kind of curious, is that you have your stepfather's last name as opposed to your father. And I was curious how that came about, that you decided not to keep your father's name.
Well, obviously my father and mother didn't marry, so I took her Kodashinsky name, and I used that throughout my years in Germany, and when I got to the United States. So I was perfectly happy to stay that, but I was in elementary school, and there was a kid in school who called me a Nazi, and I pummeled him. And the principal called my mother and said, "You got to teach your son a little bit about democracy." But she also said, what they also suggested that maybe I use the name that my mother is using, because that would make life easier. So that's the story. Now, what I've done is I simply took the Kodashinsky name and used it as my middle name. I figured the Spanish do that, I can do it. So on my passport, I have my mother's full last name, and she wanted to preserve her family's name. And that may have been one reason she didn't want to marry in the first place. But when she sort of conferred uh, her family's name to me, by virtue of my legitimate but not legitimate by marriage. I mean, I'm legitimate according to British law because my father was there and signed for me, and he still wanted to marry her. So that kind of is an odd explanation. It perhaps also explains why she went, the kind of mentality that led her to go back to Germany. She wanted to reclaim what she had. She wanted to reclaim German culture. She corresponded with her music teacher all of her life, the Wagnerian scholar. You might ask, why the hell would he become a Wagnerian scholar based on what had happened to him in Berlin? But you've got to understand that when he left Berlin in 39, shortly after she did, he was tipped off by a friend of his who was in the SS, warning him not to go home, that he should just ride the subways and wait for his visa to come in because they were going to pick him up. So, these stories about Germany, Germans, situation in Berlin, my two relatives who actually lived in hiding during the war in Berlin, complicated stories, and even whatever contact I had in Germany with a Jewish community, which was actually considerable, not only the children's home where I stayed, but my mother took me to, my sister and me to a synagogue for services to introduce us to German culture. And as far as she was concerned, Berlin for her was the place to reintroduce us to it. And, I grew up feeling Jewish, because of those contacts. And when we came to Santa Monica, she was very good friends with some of the older Jews in Venice who had their numbers emblazoned on their forearms, and she tells the story that when she warned my sister not to say anything when you would see the numbers there. And of course, my sister being still pretty young, that's exactly what she did when she was introduced to them. And the man with the numbers said, well, that's just, I just put it there so I could remember my telephone number. So I'm sort of like, I grew up with it. And yet, yeah, I grew up in Germany and, I grew up in a German environment. I went to public school in Germany. I spoke fluent German before I came here. Uh, so, and my mother also had this love of German culture, which was engendered when she went to the Jewish school and the Jüdische Kinderschule and the poets Heine, all the things that made life wonderful in Germany before the Nazis came. So, and I think when my wife and I went back to Berlin, and my wife was, she's not Jewish, she was raised Catholic, but she jokes that, well, I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood. I know more about Judaism than you do. And sometimes she does. But she was very hesitant to go to Berlin because of what had happened. But we went there and we saw all the cultural achievements as a result, of by Jews. She said, well, really, Berlin is kind of like a Jewish town still, despite what had happened. So the Nazis aren't going to take away her hometown, the city that she loved, the city of the Weimar Republic. I mean, her act of defiance is to tell them to go stick it. She was angry. And she was angry when she was there. She was angry when we came here in terms of what had happened. So, and at the same time, if she met somebody who came from Germany who she wouldn't hold it against them because she said, well, the sins of the fathers are not conveyed to the children. That's what she said. And she was very enlightened in that regard. The same went for women's right, racial equality. She was right down all the way in terms of a very enlightened outlook on life, and that's what I got from her as well. Uh, so,
Peter,
yeah,
will you take a question from Malta?
sure, I take as many as you want. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay.
My question was about her education, whether she had other opportunities besides the nursing school to continue her education, because it seems to me from what you said that it was something that was very precious to her. And I also wanted to thank you for sharing this, because I think we often hear like one-dimensional portrait of survivors. I disagree with your publisher, by the way. I think it's all connected to the show as well. Even though you continued in your book about her life afterwards, I think it's all connected. So it's important to have this as well, because otherwise we're not doing them justice.
Yeah, I mean,
And-
many
Thank you.
survivors were successful, adaptive, really great stories.
Mhm.
People like my mother were successful, but in another realm as people. And now, as far as continuing education, when she did community college when she came to the States, and her English was impeccable. She spoke British English, and she was a fluent writer. She was very, very competent. She worked in the nursing profession in the United States. She wasn't an RN because, but she did a number of jobs until she couldn't anymore, and that was the extent of it. Otherwise, she had a lot of friends. Some, she worked as a nurse in Beverly Hills, and she had patients like Igor Stravinsky and people like that who were friends. And I went actually to an art exhibit of Vera Stravinsky because that just gives you an idea of how charismatic she was. She had made friends all over the place in the entertainment industry and music and arts and so on. But she also reached out to the bag ladies in Santa Monica and tried to help them and had sympathy for them. That's the kind of person she was. And whether or not you measure that in terms of conventional success, I don't know. But she was who she wanted to be. And my sister and I are the people that we wanted to be. So that was the end of it. And the way we've raised our children, we're the same way.
It is, I think, being true to herself is a success and a big one.
And on that note, we thank you so much, Peter. It's been an hour and a half. It's 2:30 in the morning in Malta. So we want to say goodnight to everyone. Please remember, our next program will be Sunday, July 14th at 7 p.m. This really unusual book, Plunder, by Menachem Kaiser. He will be with us from his home in Brooklyn. Peter, we're really happy that you've joined our group and that you have been with us on a couple of other occasions on these programs, and hope you'll continue to do that. I want to thank you. I also want to thank some of the other guests who were on the call tonight, whom we haven't met before, but you're all welcome. The link will be the same on July 14th. Hope you can join us then. Thanks, everybody. And Peter, thank you again so very much. Peter, make sure that you look at all the lovely comments
Thank you.
that were left in the chat area.
Yeah, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to look at them, and I really enjoyed. I mean, I think it's great to meet all of you, and I want to be part of it. I am in the area, obviously, and I'll be there on the 17th and afterwards. And if you have any questions, I don't know, my email, or I guess if you can email me, I'm at my full name at comcast.net. It's Peter Wiesner at comcast.net if you have any questions. Or if if anything, comes to mind, I'm happy to happy to respond. Now that I'm retired, I have the time for people.
And I should add once again that Peter's book is widely available. You can get it on Amazon, and Peter will inscribe one to you as well, I'm sure.
Oh, sure.
All right. Everybody, have a
Thank you,
great
David.
evening.
Thank you very much,
Thanks.
David.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Bon voyage. Bon
Thank you.
voyage.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night,
Good
Good
everyone.
night.
Thank you very
Good
much.
night. Thank you, Peter.
Bye.
Bye-bye.